So we're gonna now pick up where we left off yesterday. We were walking through the bill, and Steve Collier is back joining us. And Steve, where did we leave off? What page were we?
Good afternoon. I had us halfway through page 15. And so we had not been through section 14 yet.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we start there? And I think just for the record, you should probably introduce yourself again.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So should I start on that section?
Yeah.
So the rest of the language, we went through the bulk of the apiary language the other day. The remaining parts are really quite simple. There's a couple of language changes, including the owner, so a gender neutral change that you see in line 17 on page 15. The next page addresses, I think we briefly talked about this. There's a misuse of colony versus hive. So this next page corrects that. Hive is just the physical structure of where the bees live. Colony is the bees, the hive, the combs, the honey. We don't regulate hives without bees. We regulate apiaries that have bees and colonies. So all this is doing is making the statute the way we already apply it and changing it to colony instead of hive. So I think that's all pretty straightforward.
I think Representative Rice has a comment.
I was just going to ask, is this are you already doing it with colonies and you're just making that language change?
Yes. I'm a little nervous now whenever Representative.
Yes, we should acknowledge that yesterday Representative Rice thought a small, very small, but not unimportant word needed to be changed. So yeah, and versus or.
Yes.
Yeah.
Makes a difference, and I didn't see it.
That's why we're walking through.
2 hours younger than you.
That helps. So should I move to the next section or?
Yeah.
So section 16, so it's a little maybe confusing without all the context, but I think 2 years ago, this proposed amendment falls within the fertilizer and lime chapter. So the agency regulates fertilizer and lime, and the requirements are that everybody has to register their product, be licensed, has to accurately label their product, and cannot use adulterated products. So that's essentially the overlay. A couple of years ago, recognizing that there are new products beyond fertilizer and lime, there's a lot of different things, including soil amendments and plant biostimulants. There's a lot of new products that are being developed to improve the soil. This definition of soil amendment was added. What we recognized over the winter, I believe, was that the current definition of soil amendment excludes the types of media that are not soil-based. So hydroponics, there are certain kinds of growing media that don't involve soil. So the whole point of this is to make sure that whatever is being used to grow plants is being accurately represented and registered so we know what it is and is not adulterated. So we just felt like it was a good idea to not only regulate things or to know about things that improve soil or arguably improve soil, but also the equivalent of those things. So that's all this change is trying to do, is bring in the non-soil growing media into the same definition.
Right.
So we had some questions when we went over this with Mike O'Grady about whether you were trying to get at hydroponics or not trying to get it. And it sounds like the intention is to get at hydroponics here.
Anything that would be added to improve those non-soil, to treat them the same way as soil. If something is designed to improve the physical, chemical, biological, or other characteristics of the soil or the non-soil growing media, then yes, we want that to be registered, accurately advertised, and not adulterated.
So up to this point, there hasn't been anything in the statute that deals with a hydroponic medium.
I wouldn't want to say that as broadly as nowhere, but at least in this fertilizer and lime amendment, I don't think they're not incorporated, at least within soil amendment, and I don't think elsewhere either.
So the overall intent here or impact would be making things more restrictive than they might currently be.
I wouldn't say restrictive, I would say open, because you can have a soil amendment. What you have to do is you have to register it with us so we know about it, and you have to represent what's in it so we know about that, and it can't be adulterated. The only thing I think that's a potential downfall for anybody who's proposing to register a soil amendment for hydroponics or another non-soil growing media is there's an $85 annual registration fee. But that's only for any novel product. So if you do have a novel, if someone else is using the same product, you don't have to separately register that. But if you are registering a new product, so that's the, but it's really, it's a notice so we know about it, so consumers know about it, and that to make sure that the representations in the label are accurate.
Senator Templeton?
So if I see this clearly, you're saying that amendments to hydroponic grow, pardon the vernacular, would fall under soil amendments.
Yes.
I think I have a problem with that
Okay.
because soil is not non-soil hydroponic medium. They're two completely different things. And I feel like it's an adulteration of the term soil.
Okay, so I would suggest that it's not, it's trying to make it equivalent to soil. So what we're looking at is not the soil or the non-growing medium. We're looking at something, a substance or a mixture of a substance that's intended to improve the physical, chemical, biological, or other characteristics of the soil. So it's an additive.
I understand.
It's some, so, but it's designed to improve that medium. And then the question is, should people know what is in that medium? Should they know should the representation be accurate? And if, most importantly, if it's adulterated so that it means it could cause harm, should there be authority in our agency to address that?
I think we can take that concern, Representative Templeman, and note it, and because I see exactly where you're coming from. I also understand where the agency's coming from too. And
I do too.
Let's set that aside. Yeah, we'll come back because there may be other things where we feel like, we want to either know more or we've got some other ideas that we want to sort of bounce off of you. So.
And I'm definitely not the expert on this. There's people in our agency that are much more equipped to get into the details of what exactly we're trying to do if you need to delve into that some more.
Mm-hmm. Representative Rice, did you?
Okay. That covered it.
So yes, let's make a note of that. And sorry, Representative O'Brien, who's behind on the screen, has his hand up.
Hi, Steve. I don't have the bill in front of me, but I do remember there was language on unprocessed, I think, was it? In a couple spots, I think, in this section. And I just wondered if there was a definition for that. Like where in a continuum does manure become fertilizer as far as it needs to be processed or bagged or whatever?
So that's a great question, Representative O'Brien. And so manure in general does not fall within, it's exempt from these. It's not considered fertilizer or lime. In the beginning of this chapter, there's maybe 20 definitions or so that define different things. And so fertilizer and lime are kind of the main categories, but then there were these additional additives added a couple of years ago, and some things are excluded from any of this, including, as I understand it, animal manure.
Great. Okay.
Okay. So the final section, I believe, or final three sections all involve the same thing. And this is for nurseries. And I'll just give you a little bit of overlay of what we're doing. Or trying to do. There are quite a few changes, but most of them are just to try to get this up to the current standard for our other programs. And they're mostly due process protection. So really it's creating additional requirements on the agency to make sure that when we are enforcing some of these provisions that we're doing so correctly. Arguably, we shouldn't need that since we should know how to do it. But it's also helpful to have in statute when our people go to look at what they're doing, they look at the statute, they look at the rules, and they evaluate how to do it. So we just looking through this language, a lot of it is dated and it doesn't really spell out the way that things should happen. If you're issuing a stop sale or if you're telling someone they have to quarantine something, we just want those requirements to be clear that what we should be telling them, what the timeframes are, so that people have an opportunity to know what to expect, also know exactly what their rights are to challenge that, and also it's really due process protections, but it just makes sense to have the language updated to meet our other existing practices and requirements in other programs. On this first page, and also the whole idea of this for nursery, it's regulating nursery dealers and growers. The idea is to keep plant pests and plant disease at bay. And I think the reasons for that are pretty important because if you are getting, there's a lot of plants that cross state boundaries, cross international boundaries. You get things like the spotted lanternfly or the emerald ash borer, or you get blight, or you get other plant diseases. Those can have devastating effects for both agriculture and forestry and even landowners. So the whole purpose of this program is if you're going to be a nursery dealer or grower, so you're in the business of raising and or selling nursery stock, we want to make sure it's free of pests, free of disease. And if it's not, that there's a mechanism to deal with it. So that's the reason that it matters. The improvements we think are technical and just better for the person who's regulated. On the first page, though, I think there may have been a question. So on page 17, line 16, the definition of nursery dealer. We're proposing to add installs. Right now, it says means any person who sells, installs, or distributes. We think this is kind of duplicative of what's already implied by the statute because anyone who distributes nursery is already supposed to be covered, be a nursery dealer. But, and there's another provision of the statute that talks specifically about someone who's involved in installation being subject to the rule. But if someone is, as an example, a landscaper may go to Home Depot out of state and buy a bunch of nursery and bring it into the state and install it. And if they're doing that for commercial gain, we would like them to be registered so we know who they are. So if they do have something that has plant disease or plant pest, that we can address it. A sort of a thing to keep in mind is that the dealers who are registered with us, unless they're pretty substantial and they have a half an acre or a substantial retail space, it's an annual $30 registration fee. So it's pretty reasonable for those who do have to register with us. And it's also, if you sell less than $1,000 a year, you're exempt from that. So it's a pretty modest, I think, amount, but it is important to be able to track the disease and the pest. So we add install. We don't think that, from our perspective, that doesn't change what's intended, but it does make it clear if we ran into an issue where somebody said, I'm not covered by this, we think it's better that the language be expressed instead of implied. So that's the change that we're requesting there.
Like this typically come out of a situation where you found you were not able to collect the license fee, or because somebody made that argument?
It certainly could. I don't believe that's the genesis here. I think we have a lot of really bright people who go over the language all the time, and they just oftentimes just stumble upon something, or they're giving guidance and that question pops up in their own mind. So sometimes that absolutely happens. In this case, I think it was just, we already believe that if you're installing, then you're covered and you have to register with us. But I think we just noticed that the language isn't as clear as it could be.
Okay. Yes, Representative Levitt.
But my question is sort of comes from, what about folks who sell vegetable starts at the farmer's market, or your local CSA person who sells mums? And I'm really more concerned about vegetable starts, because would they then technically be considered a nursery dealer?
So great question. It all comes back to the definition, I think, of nursery stock,
Okay.
which means, I'll read it to you here because I certainly don't have it memorized. Means all woody or herbaceous shrubs, trees, plants, and vines, including bulbs and rhizomes, as well as buds, grafts, scions, and other plants capable of propagation. That's the definition. And so if that includes starts, then yes. And I honestly don't know whether it does, because I don't deal with the section very often. But it's somebody who, keep in mind, it's somebody who's doing it for commercial purposes
No, they're
only.
selling it.
If you're raising it for your own farm, this wouldn't apply. If you are,
Well, they sell it as part of the farmer, you go to any farmer's market in Grand Isle County and every single farmer is selling tomato starts, pepper starts. Are they selling $1,000 worth? Probably not. So
Right.
I'm just, I'm just curious where they fall.
and that's a great question, and I can get that answer for you. I'm not certain now.
Okay. It seems like they might be exempt because I don't think it's $1,000 a year that they're selling some of these guys.
If they weren't, then they would not be, obviously.
I think there are probably though folks who sell them not at farmers markets who easily cross that $1,000 threshold. So
Right.
yeah, we probably get some clarification so that we're all on the same page. Representative Cole?
And I would note, I think the first word in that definition is woody. And so I think a lot of vegetable starts would not qualify.
Yes, but then absolutely, and I know I'm reading it, which is easier, but that's woody or herbaceous shrubs, then comma, trees, comma, plants, comma, vine. So I think no, it's a great point. It's nice to have it right in front of you, though.
Representative Temple?
So I'm wondering how this pertains to cannabis as we're putting forward a bill that would allow cultivators to sell seedlings. I guess that would cover them as well.
Well, that's a great question. Our agency has been intentionally trying to stay out of the cannabis realm.
Right.
Just because under federal law, it's a crime to have. There's a federal drug workplace act that doesn't allow any state, our employees to have access to quote unquote drugs at work. So, and that can jeopardize our federal money, and our agency is pretty heavily reliant on federal money. So we have been trying to draw lines that separate cannabis for that reason.
That's why I brought it up.
Right. So I would be leery of us having any role where we are actively regulating cannabis for those reasons.
Okay.
So,
But it would be smart to maybe be sensitive to the things that you are being cautious of here, like out of state pathogens and such.
yeah. And our tactic is that we believe that the Cannabis Control Board has authority over cannabis. And we're trying to maintain those lines because they don't receive federal money and they have the authority under state law to regulate it. So we think that's a good demarcation line, but the legislature has to agree with us to keep that in place. So we're trying to do it carefully because it's a real challenge for,
Representative Rice, did you have a question?
It was back on the starts and $1,000 limit. I would suggest that probably a lot of the starts are included in that, and the $1,000 cap probably does exempt a lot of those, sorts of farms that are doing it as one small piece of a diversified operation. But maybe we should ask those farms if that $1,000 does sort of meet their needs. I would also suggest that a lot of those farms are probably starting from seed on farm, and so not getting into that crossing state boundary sort of, that is a concern in the nursery world sort of at large. And so maybe that's another place to look for an exemption if it's necessary for these other businesses.
Okay, good.
yeah. I think that was it.
Installs.
Sorry, let me take that off my. Nope, sorry about that. I jumped ahead. There is more. So going to page 18 then. That's a gender neutral change on page 18. On page 19, near the bottom of the page, all of these suggested changes are back in line of what I was talking about. We're making the due process rights clear. So instead of vaguely saying in line 13, I'm now reading, Any order must be confirmed in writing within 7 days, just fleshing out what happens if you give a verbal order first and then you have to follow up with a written document which tells you exactly what you should be doing and what your rights are. So that's the whole point of that, is instead of having vague, we can issue orders, it's spelling out what kinds of orders we can issue and what should happen when we do. The next page, on page 20, under administrative orders, section 1037 or section 19 on this language, all the same things, just spelling out what kinds of things that we can be telling people and what they can expect from us and what their rights are if we do that. So these are just bringing up the statute to in line with our other programs and making our responsibilities and others' rights clearer. On page 21, this is worth discussing for sure. It's there's a section here which requires us, and this is the part that I find humorous, requires us to agree to an amount of compensation if someone has disease or if someone had a pest which requires their plants to be destroyed. That's a statutory impossibility. You really can't compel parties to agree to something. You can set up a framework where a judge or someone else decides, but you can't, there's no way for anyone to sort of to force someone else to agree, which is why we have courts and judges, because if you can't agree, then someone tells you what to do. So that's one, it's just kind of a legal impossibility, but this is also an old program. I think it used to be more common for the state to compensate when there was a necessity for destruction. These things have been, I think, winnowing away over time. I think private insurance has mostly gotten in the realm of doing this when most commercial businesses have insurance. If they have losses, those losses are insured. It's not that we don't want to compensate people if we ask to have them destroy their product. We don't have any, there's no funding appropriated for that though. So not only is this something we can't do, be forced to agree with somebody else about how much their stock is worth, but we also don't have any money to pay for it. So we're just asking to eliminate this provision. There are occasions where when there's because we work with USDA and their program for plants, there are some federal programs that when a disease and when there are plants that are infected, the federal program sometimes provides money. We've had that in one instance recently where some, I think it was nursery stock, had to be destroyed and the feds were requiring it and they had money for it, but we don't have a separate pool of money. I think if anything horrific ever came up, it would certainly be worth us in the legislature talking about whether or not, if there was a terrible outbreak that warranted compensation, seems like it might be a good thing for us to be talking about whether an appropriation was appropriate to cover that expense. But to have it in there as this sort of mandatory program that's not funded and that doesn't really work is just not very helpful.
Representative Rice.
Does the agency have data or a history that would show us when this program has been used, if there's been compensation paid out? That's
a great question, and I did have this with the deputy director who's in charge of this program when she first proposed this. I did talk to her about it. As I recall, there's one instance fairly recently that happened where the feds were involved and there was compensation, as I understand it. But what I remember her telling me was that we hadn't used it in years. I don't know how many that is. I think it's very uncommon for us to have anything be destroyed. But if there's we work with people, what would happen first is a stop sale and a quarantine, then you do further evaluation about what's actually there. Sometimes you can eradicate a pest without destruction. If it's a plant disease, I think it'd be more likely that you need destruction. But we have our experts in the agency could certainly chat about that more if you'd like. We have an entomologist, we have a deputy director, Emily Inoue, whose title escapes me, but she's heavily involved in these issues. So we do have a small but sort of vigorous team that works on trying to make sure that we don't have plant disease and pest all throughout the state.
Other questions? Yeah, that would be helpful. I think maybe just to. And if you're able to help us connect with that, Steve, great. If not, we can, reach out as well.
I'd be happy to do that,
Representative O'Brien, on screen.
Steve, does this just apply to nurseries? We brought up the other day, the maple sugaring crop, for example, if the Chinese longhorn beetle got into it, it's an agricultural plant. Would the agency be on the hook for say compensating 100 acres being cut down?
So great question, Representative O'Brien. This particular provision only applies to nursery dealers or growers. So I don't know whether there may be any other comparable programs depending on the agricultural product, but this provision is only for registered nursery dealers or growers.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Do you know if does the USDA compensate? It's not really related, but the chicken flocks that have been had to be destroyed because of avian flu.
They do. They do. There's a program and we work closely with them and we're responsible for administering a lot of the safeguards related to avian influenza, but there is a program that's federally funded that does compensate if birds have to be depopulated because of that. And generally speaking, once avian influenza is present, depopulation is a requirement because there isn't any way to successfully treat it or quarantine it. And knock on wood every time we talk about avian influenza, because we've been fairly, well, I won't even say it.
Okay. Well, thank you then for walking us through that. We've got a couple of follow-up things that we'll. And
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now we've got Mark Paquette, who is going to help us understand or answer some questions I think came up yesterday when we were looking at the weights and measures section of this proposed legislation. And that's back on page 7, or that section starts on page 7. But if you'd like to introduce yourself and just give us the quick thumbnail of what you do, that would be terrific.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mark Paquette. I work obviously with Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets with the weights and measures section. Our section is involved with a lot of consumer protection work, but also equity in the marketplace. Anytime something is bought or sold where weight or measure is involved. So we do all the gas station inspections, we do different scales, we do package weighing, we do scanner inspections in the grocery stores, we do consumer complaints, we're all over the place. We speak a lot with consumers and the retailers that we interact with. We do thousands of inspections. We all buy gasoline, we all go to the store and do purchase over the scanners. I think something we can all relate to, including myself. It's been a very challenging year with some of the retailers and some of the inspections that we've been doing. And I'm here to answer any questions that you have in regard to the bill, the housekeeping bill, or anything else you have on the Weights and Measures program itself.
Thank you for joining us. I think there were some questions that came up yesterday. Part of the draft legislation that proposes changing the frequency that inspections are conducted on at least some instances. I'll open it up to see whether the committee's got specific questions that you want to ask related to that. Representative Rice?
Yeah, I think we were just wondering yesterday, sort of, without detail being laid out in statute, if you have, first of all, it's a lot of different things that you're inspecting.
Yes.
And so it doesn't sort of break down which ones might be still within that 12 months and which ones wouldn't, or which ones would be prioritized.
Sure.
And then the changing from 12 months to 12 months or a longer period, and what that longer period might look like, how it would be determined.
Yeah. Let me give some background on that. First of all, Weights and Measures Law, Title IX, Chapter 73 under Commerce, and the existing law that we have kind of addresses that. And I'll read that on Section 2635. When not otherwise provided by law, the secretary may inspect and test to ascertain if they are correct. All weights and measures kept, offered, or exposed for sale, the secretary shall, within a 12-month period or more or less frequently as deemed necessary, inspect and test to ascertain if they are correct, all weights and measures commercially used. So the Title IX, Chapter 73, which this part is also in, already gives that flexibility for the secretary to make those decisions. The staff obviously works on behest of the secretary, but if there were prioritization issues that we would certainly run that by the secretary to make sure there were no concerns. If there were specific devices or category devices. And what this would do on licensing, so this allows it for the inspection, but the licensing language, as you can see, is a little bit different. It kind of locks us into that 12-month period of time. And it's worded strangely that it appears they can issue a license as long as an inspection takes place within 12 months of the application. So a lot of folks license at a certain period of time, and based on staffing or priorities, we don't even know when they pay for that license on some categories if we're going to be able to get there within 12 months. What sparked this was last year getting some questions from farmer market scale vendors who we were not getting to do their scales, calling in and asking if they should still license their scales. And my initial response to them was, yes, you should continue to license. We want you in the system. We want to know where these scales and devices are, how many there are. And eventually over time, it's our intention to do these scales. But, we're very busy and we have priorities and staffing issues. And a few of them, question that. And I did get into this and I saw that we certainly want to follow the letter of the law. And it would be advantageous to have the law actually mirror what we do or what we're capable of doing with staffing issues. We held for farmers market scales clinics for a number of years. We would go to 11 centralized locations around the state of Vermont and have folks bring their scales into us, and we would test and inspect those scales, approve them, make sure they're licensed and taken care of. COVID, we had one all lined up to do in April of 2020, and COVID put everything on the back burner. The next year, put it on the back burner. And then last year, we had issues getting it back into place and issues with priorities. Last year and continues on now is a challenging time with fuel prices, gasoline prices, fuel oil deliveries, propane deliveries. Secretary Tebbetts asked me last April and June, with the prices of fuel increasing, what can the weights and measures do for the consumers in regard to these high prices? And unfortunately, the state of Vermont and our section certainly doesn't set prices or determine what people have to pay for goods. But I told him what we can do this year is make sure we get every gas station done, every oil truck that's used for home delivery, and every propane truck that's used for home delivery done, inspected, make sure they're accurate and correct, make sure that the dealers are giving and disclosing the price per gallon and leaving the tickets when they go, which is required by law, and protect the consumer at least on that basis. And that was one of our big priorities last year, which again had the farmers market scales take a back seat. Now this year we're doing the farmers market scale clinics. It's posted on our site. If you go on the agency site, we just posted that a week ago. We're excited to get back and to do that. And we're going to be meeting again the producers at 11 different locations around the state. We hope to start getting a handle on that again. But again, due to the staffing issues, priority issues, sometimes we can't get those to the devices within that 12 months after they license, which then turns into an administrative issue that you could never keep track of who we went to, who's licensed, not licensed. Do you issue refunds if you were to follow the real letter of the law? So this is a little bit of housekeeping language to clean that up.
So it sounds like there's some, I don't want to say inconsistency, but right now, the existing language and statute gives more flexibility for inspection timing.
Yes.
Than it does for licensing.
Yeah. Yes.
That helps. I think that helps me in any case understand a little bit better why this request is here. Other questions Representative Supplement?
So you started when you introduced yourself that it's been a hard beginning of the year. Is that regarding the staffing shortages that you mentioned?
I would say 2022 is very challenging for businesses and retailers. We do a lot of retail inspection work. Some of what we do are scanner inspections. We make sure that when it says $2.99 on the shelf, and you as a consumer have a basket full of goods and you go through the scanner, that the scanner is going to charge you $2.99. We have an inspection process and protocol and tolerances that are vetted to make sure that retailers within certain parameters and tolerances follow that. And it's been a difficult time for retailers with inflation and staffing issues on their end to do that, which has added a lot to our workload and re-inspections and issuing of penalties and pre-inspection and pre-hearing meetings and hearing meetings and doing education and outreach to the retailers.
So part of the, just, sorry about me being obtuse here, but so is the request for kind of softening softening your requirements have to do with those staffing issues?
We are not asking for more staff or changing of the budget, but yes, there are ongoing staffing issues with our program at times. And part of it is we do so many different things and the consumer calls in and you get a complaint that does apply to weights and measures and it meets the letter of the law, but something we've never dealt with. And now we're researching, now we're going into doing all of this stuff on a foundational basis. And when we're building a little mini program, spending hours doing this to meet the letter of the law and to meet the needs of the consumer. And staffing can be an issue on that.
Maybe what we should be doing is getting you more staffing.
Well, I'm certainly not sitting here today asking for that, but I will tell you some of the challenges, that we deal with. We are dealing with, expansion of things that we do. Technology is changing. Electric vehicle charging issues are headed down the road. That's something on our radar. I work on a national basis with the National Conference on Weights and Measures, where certainly not all states are advocating to get more electric vehicles on the roads, but there are certain states that are, including the state of Vermont. I've done a lot of work on some of those issues, mirroring what California has done with laws and regulations, or some of the traceability on the equipment when it comes to people buying electricity to charge their vehicles. This is something on the radar, and I think there's something in the governor's proposal to give us another position primarily targeted toward the EV issue. So, we certainly are expanding what we would like to do. There's things that we would do if we had more staffing, including fuel quality issues, capability to take samples and check octane, which is part of our law and regulation. It says we may do it, but not shall do it. So we try to stick with some of the issues that say we shall do it or that are a priority that are coming back from the consumer. So there's a lot of juggling and prioritization with the resources that we do have. And one of the other things I want to highlight that we do is we have a staff of 6 people, including myself. We also operate a NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology metrology lab in Randolph as part of the new facility down there, state-of-the-art, absolutely perfect spot. I'm one of 2 state metrologists, not meteorologists. I don't know what the weather is. Metrologists, you can Google that, and it's very interesting. Metrology is the study of measurement. And on top of everything else we do, we provide calibrations of and traceability of standards that are used by industry and the inspection program that provides the traceability and the accuracy of those standards, so that when a service company places into service a gas station, they have the equipment that is traceable to us, so that when they calibrate the gas pump, that a gallon equals a gallon within a very fine tolerance. And also that weights that are used to calibrate all kinds of scales, whether they be a very small deli scale in the state of Vermont, or I'll say New England, because we get a lot of out-of-state work, That those scales are correct, or a hopper scale that's selling feed, seed, or fertilizer, truck scales that are selling aggregate or asphalt. We work in conjunction with the Department of Transportation and make sure that the plants that are selling asphalt and paving the roads, that their weights have traceability and accuracy through our laboratory and our program. We're going to have Pike and all these big companies very soon submit thousands and thousands of pounds of test weight down there in Randolph, which we will provide the accuracy and the traceability on. So we have a very small staff that's doing a huge amount of work. Hydrometers, the maple industry, 16,500 maple hydrometers were done in our laboratory in 2022. That was a record. The last highest number was 11,000. It gives you an indication of the health of the maple industry when you see that. I had folks out there doing oil trucks and propane trucks, and that was a priority. We waited right until the middle of November, and I called in 5 of my folks, and we were all down there testing, inspecting, unpacking, stamping, and sending out hydrometers. And one other thing I'll mention, I think the issue of DOT scales or the Department of Motor Vehicles, truck enforcement, I think that may have come up or was mentioned recently. We do maintain traceability and authority over those scales by supervising those scales. We provide an inspector to supervise the testing of those scales that are used for law enforcement purposes. The Department of Transportation, DMV, supplied traceable equipment and staff to help and assist with the testing of those. But we make sure that before they're used, that we witness the test, make sure they're accurate and correct. We put an approval seal on those and do a proper documentation. So if there are overweight trucks and they go to court, which they do, that it has our sticker on there and there's traceability on those scales, and that DMV has something to stand behind. They wanted to do those independently. We did them for years, and Irene in 2011 took everything out and they offered to take it over. And workload issues, they said, you're more than welcome to, but I figured that there would be some issues or challenges or concerns with oversight. And within a year, we were asked to oversee and again, supervise that. So they purchased the equipment, which was a little bit of a benefit to our program. And they provided some staff, which was a benefit to our program. So we provide one person to make sure those are accurate and correct also.
And you're referring to the agency of transportation,
Yes.
state agency?
Yes, Department of Motor Vehicle Enforcement Program. They're the folks, they have law enforcement authority. They have the larger vehicles. We did, I think, 100.
White and yellow.
Yes.
DMV.
Yes, the DMV folks. Yeah. Yeah.
When they pull you over.
They can pull you over.
Okay.
Unless you have your house plates.
I was wondering, every time I drive by a weigh station that's closed, which is most of the time, wondering why that's the case. And so I'll just ask you, since we're talking about staffing, is the answer to that question at all because you don't have enough staff to maintain to properly inspect the equipment?
No, there's not many of those left on the interstate. When I started, I've done this 34 years. When I started, there were a lot of scales. I had the old antique ones. I'd go around to the service companies. It was fascinating to do, and they've pulled a lot of those out, and they have put a few more in down Putney Way. I know there's a new set. We got down there and did that. So we will do those. There's one Fairhaven too when you head into New York. There's a nice set of scales there too. So we do those once during the calendar year. We have a beautiful state-of-the-art truck scale that has 20,000 pounds of certified weight and a weight cart in there, has traceability and accuracy of the weight cart and the weights. And we go to all of those scales once during the calendar year to make sure they're accurate and correct. One of the reasons that those are closed a lot are the DMV law enforcement folks don't use them a lot unless they're doing a specific law enforcement thing in that area. But what they do, those vehicles all have portable wheel load weighers. They're little scales. They can pull them out of the back and they put them under the axles and the wheels, and they have the guys come forward and they can check the actual weight or each tire weight. So they all have a set of those. And that's what I was primarily referencing to one of my folks doing the 180 of those with their staff, but they also do have a few of those in-ground vehicle scales also that we do.
When there was a new connector highway built, the Bennington bypass, it opened about 20 years ago, and the next large pull offered trucks to be weighed, and it's never used. I mean, yeah, kind of
It's never manned, really, very simple.
never man. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. In any case, that's for another agency, I guess. Other questions? Representative O'Brien.
Mark, one of our favorite subjects is cannabis, of course. Do you calibrate the scales for that side of things for the CCB? I know it's not ag, but certainly that an ounce is important in that business.
Yeah, our role in that is we had a few meetings, some of the cannabis board folks and some in our administration too. And the weights and measures program, we intend and are treating cannabis the same way we would any other product. It's especially at retail. So in answer to your question, when it comes to weights and measures, we have a very specific definition of commercial. Commercial does not include scales that are used in the processing or packaging or any of those processes. If we defined commercial as that, we would have to go into every factory that packages goods. We would have to go into Cabot Creamery and go on their lines where they package and segregate cheese, or into Maple Grove Farms where they use the scales or everything else. We define commercial as scales that are used primarily in a direct sale situation where the buyer and seller are present, or in the case of a hopper scale or a vehicle scale that if you think of feed going to farmers, where it's a direct sale to the farmer, but because of logistics, the farmer can't be there because we view that as a type of a direct sale also. So we do not check the scales for cannabis that are used for packaging or pre-packaging. But what we are planning on doing, and we've scoped out the equipment, is to do some regulatory work in retail stores to make certain that the packages are accurate and correct. So when a consumer goes in and purchases something and it's labeled at 3 grams or 4 grams, that they are indeed getting 3 to 4 grams of product. And to make sure that if there's packaging material, none of that is being counted as part of the weight. And in other words, we want to protect those consumers the same way we would anyone going to the grocery store and purchasing anything over a deli scale. So we're in process of that. And we've had a lot of questions as far as scales and legal for trade scales and definitions. And again, with our staff, it's been another addition to something that we, hadn't planned on a few years ago. But I've been in contact with a number of cannabis growers, giving advisement on what adequate scales they could be using, should be using, scale companies that are willing to go into packing plants and check with their traceable standards to make sure that their scales meet their quality control programs and they're accurate and correct also. And working with the National Conference on Weights and Measures, it's a hot button issue also, as it is with electric vehicle charging. And the conference is looking at making changes in the handbook. We voted on this in July, and it failed in the vote by 1 vote nationally to include additional rules and regulations in this handbook 44, which the state of Vermont adopts in whole. So we are involved on that level. We developed a very condensed 2-page handout for cannabis retailers or anyone in the business that defines parameters illegal for trade scales, what to look for, scale companies, and to let them know that at some point in time, we will be doing some package weighing.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and answering the specific question about the draft, but also just giving us a little more background on what you do.
Sure.
Interesting. And I know that I believe the committee last year or at a previous session took a field trip down to see what you do.
Yes.
And we have enough new members of the committee that maybe we'll want to do that again. at some point. So,
Sounds good.
yeah.
Always welcome. We enjoy anyone coming down and taking a look at the laboratory, the Weights and Measures Lab. We have a lot of fun when people come in and talk to them and show them some of the standards and some of the things we deal with anytime.
Can we bring our scales with us to be calibrated?
I don't know if you want, if we can't fix it, I don't know, we may.
You're not gonna get it back.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes.
So we'll wrap up there with this